One of the things I fairly quickly discovered after I started looking into universalism is that it wasn't some newfangled thing that modern woolly-minded Christians had, got into because they thought God was nice. I actually discovered that the view goes way back into Christian history, right into the early church, and that there were Christians, very significant Christian teachers and theologians and fathers of the church who believed in universal reconciliation, that God would restore all to himself. The first person to systematize that view is Origen of Alexandria in the 3rd century. Perhaps definitely one of the great geniuses of church history. I mean, his biblical knowledge was fantastic, as was his philosophical knowledge, and he wrote and preached on all sorts of things. A very devout and holy guy. He was the first person to systematize this view, and in fact, probably the first systematic theologian of the church, if that term's slightly anachronistic to use of Origen, but yes. But he wasn't coming up with it out of nowhere. I mean, what Origen was doing was drawing on earlier threads, teachings from Irenaeus of Lyon in the 2nd century, teachings from various Christian texts, scripture obviously, which was his primary source. And all the early Christian universalists were adamant that it was from scripture that they got this. But they would draw from scripture and from post-biblical traditions in the early church. And Origen pulled together these threads. For example, we have about 7 texts, Orthodox Christian texts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, in which there's an express hope that those who are in the lake of fire or suffering punishment would be released by Jesus. And in some texts, Jesus invites the saints in heaven to pray for those in the lake of fire and that they might come out. So those kind of ideas Origen draws on, that hell isn't necessarily the end of the story, but something, penultimate rather than ultimate. And he systematizes this all. And then there's a whole tradition. Origen was hugely influential. We often dismiss him, oh, he's dodgy and so on. But he had lots of very important defenders like Athanasius, who is one of the champions of Trinitarian orthodoxy. And he was a supporter of this view as well. Gregory of Nyssa, often called the father of the fathers, who was pivotal in the formation of the creed. And so these were sort of fountainheads of this view, and the tradition continued. It ran into some trouble for various reasons in the 6th century and became thereafter a minority tradition. But you can trace the line of Christian universalists even through that period, through to the Reformation and beyond, where the view began to slowly revive, and particularly in the 19th and 20th centuries it revived. But then it was often about recovering an older view. So a lot of the 19th century Christian universalists would go back and discover things in the fathers that had often been ignored or passed over and say, look, this is here. This is what Christians, not all Christians, but some important Christians who nobody considered to be unorthodox or dodgy, who were committed to God and to Scripture. This is what they thought. So why can't this be a valid Christian view?